The nights are long, the days are short. It is the time of year for a certain sort of stories. This one by Ambrose Bierce, entitled The Suitable Surroundings. One midsummer night, a farmer's boy, living about 10 miles from the city of Cincinnati, was following a bridle path through a dense and dark forest. He'd lost himself while searching for some missing cows, and near midnight was a long way from home, in a part of the country with which he was unfamiliar. But he was a stout-hearted lad, and knowing his general directions from his home, he plunged into the forest without hesitation, guided by the stars. Coming into the bridle path and observing that it ran in the right direction, he followed it. The night was clear, but in the woods it was exceedingly dark. It was more by the sense of touch than by that of sight that the lad kept the path. He could not, indeed, very easily go astray. The undergrowth on both sides was so thick as to be almost impenetrable. He had gone into the forest a mile or so when he was surprised to see a feeble gleam of light shining through the foliage skirting the path on his left. The sight of it startled him and set his heart to beating audibly. "The old Bede house is somewhere about here," he said to himself. "This must be the other end of the path, which we reach it by from our side. Ugh, what should a light be doing there?" Nevertheless, he pushed on. A moment later, he had emerged from the forest into a small, open space, mostly upgrown to brambles. There were remnants of a rotting fence. A few yards from the trail, in the middle of the clearing, was the house from which the light came, through an unglazed window. The window had once contained glass, but that and its supporting frame had long ago yielded to missiles flung by hands of venturesome boys, to attest alike their courage and their hostility to the supernatural, for the Beadle house bore the evil reputation of being haunted. Possibly it was not, but even the hardiest skeptic could not deny that it was deserted, which, in rural regions, is much the same thing. Looking at the mysterious dim light shining from the ruined window, the boy remembered with apprehension that his own hand had assisted at that destruction. His penitence was, of course, poignant in proportion to its tardiness and inefficacy. He half expected to be set upon by all the unworldly and bodiless malevolence whom he had outraged by assisting to break alike their windows and their peace. Yet this stubborn lad, shaking in every limb, would not retreat. The blood was in his veins, and it was strong and rich with the iron of the frontiersman. He started to pass the house. As he was going by, he looked in at the blank window space and saw a strange and terrifying sight. The figure of a man, seated in the center of the room, at a table upon which lay some loose sheets of paper. The elbows rested on the table, the hands supporting the head, which was uncovered. On each side, the fingers were pushed into the hair. The face showed dead yellow in the light of a single candle, just a little to one side. The flame illuminated that side of the face, but the other was in deep shadow. This man's eyes were fixed upon the blank window space with a stare in which an older and cooler observer might have discerned something of apprehension, but which seemed to the lad altogether soulless. He believed the man to be dead. The situation was horrible, but not without its fascination. The boy stopped to note it all. He was weak, faint, and trembling. He could feel the blood forsaking his face. Nevertheless, he set his teeth and resolutely advanced to the house. He had no conscious intention. It was the mere courage of terror. He thrust his white face forward into the illuminated opening. At that instant, a strange, harsh cry, a shriek, broke upon the silence of the night, the note of a screech owl. The man sprang to his feet, overturning the table and extinguishing the candle. The boy took to his heels. The day before. Good morning, Colston. I am in luck, it seems. You've often said that my commendation of your literary work was mere civility, and here you find me absorbed, actually merged in your latest story in The Messenger. Nothing less shocking than your touch upon my shoulder would have roused me to consciousness. The proof is stronger than you seem to know, replied the man that was addressed. So keen is your eagerness to read my story that you are willing to renounce selfish considerations and forgo all the pleasure that you could get from it. I don't understand you, said the other, folding the newspaper that he held and putting it into his pocket. You writers are a queer lot, anyhow. Come, tell me what I have done or omitted in this matter. In what way does the pleasure that I get or might get from your work depend on me? Well, in many ways. Let me ask you how you would enjoy your breakfast if you took it in this streetcar. Suppose the phonograph so perfected as to be able to give you an entire opera, singing, orchestration, and all. Do you think that you would get much pleasure out of it if you turned it on at your office during business hours? Do you really care for a serenade by Schubert when you hear it fiddled by an untimely Italian on a morning ferry boat? Are you always cocked and primed for enjoyment? Do you keep every mood just on tap, ready and in demand? Let me remind you, sir, that the story which you have done me the honor to begin as a means of becoming oblivious to the discomfort of this car is a ghost story. Well, has the reader no duties corresponding to his privileges? You have paid 5 cents for that newspaper. It is yours. You have the right to read it when and where you will. Much of what is in it is neither helped nor harmed by time and place and mood. Some of it actually requires to be read at once, while it is fizzling. But my story is not of that character. It is not the very latest advices from Ghostland. You are not expected to keep yourself en courant with what is going on in the realm of spooks. The stuff will keep until you have leisure to put yourself into the frame of mind appropriate to the sentiment of the piece, which I respectfully submit that you cannot do in a streetcar, even if you are the only passenger. The solitude is not of the right sort. An author has rights, which the reader is bound to respect. For specific example, well, the right to the reader's undivided attention. To deny him this is immoral. To make him share your attention with the rattle of a streetcar, the moving panorama of the crowds on the sidewalks, and the buildings beyond, with any of the thousands of distractions which make our customary environment, well, is to treat him with gross injustice. By God, it is infamous. The speaker had risen to his feet and was steadying himself by one of the straps hanging from the roof of the car. The other man looked up at him in sudden astonishment, wondering how so trivial a grievance could seem to justify such strong language. He saw that his friend's face was uncommonly pale, that his eyes glowed like living coals. "You know what I mean," continued the writer, impetuously crowding his words. "You know what I mean, Marsh. My stuff in this morning's Messenger is plainly subheaded, 'A Ghost Story.' There is ample notice to all. Every honorable reader will understand it as prescribing by implication the conditions under which the work is to be read." The man addressed as Marsh winced a trifle, then asked, with a smile, "What conditions? You know that I am only a plain businessman who cannot be supposed to understand such things. How, when, where should I read your ghost story?" "In solitude, at night, by the light of a candle. There are certain emotions which a writer can easily enough excite, such as compassion or merriment, and I can move you to tears or laughter under almost any circumstances, but for my ghost story to be effective, you must be made to feel fear, at least a strong sense of the supernatural, and that is a difficult matter. I have a right to expect that if you read me at all, you will give me a chance, that you will make yourself accessible to the emotion that I try to inspire." The car had now arrived at its terminus and stopped. The trip just completed was its first for the day, and the conversation of the two early passengers had not been interrupted. The streets were yet silent and desolate. The housetops were just touched by the rising sun. As they stepped from the car and walked away together, Marsh narrowly eyed his companion, who was reported, like most men of uncommon literary ability, to be addicted to various destructive vices. That is the revenge which dull minds take upon bright ones, in the resentment of their superiority. Mr. Colston was known as a man of genius. There are honest souls who believe that genius is a mode of excess. It was known that Colston did not drink liquor, but therefore many said that he must eat opium. Something in his appearance that morning, a certain wildness of the eyes, perhaps, an unusual pallor, a thickness and rapidity of speech, stumbling words were taken by Mr. Marsh to confirm this report. Nevertheless, he had not the self-denial to abandon a subject which he found interesting, however much it might excite his friend. Do you mean to say," he began, "that if I take the trouble to observe your directions, to place myself in the conditions that you demand, solitude, night, and a tallow candle, that you can, with your ghostly work, give me an uncomfortable sense of the supernatural, as you call it? Can you accelerate my pulse, make me start at sudden noises, send a nervous chill along my spine, cause my hair to rise?" Colston turned suddenly and looked him squarely in the eyes as they walked. "You would not dare. You have not the courage," he said. He emphasized the words with a contemptuous gesture. "Oh, you are brave enough to read me on a streetcar, but in a deserted house, alone, in the forest, at night? Bah! I have a manuscript in my pocket that would kill you." Marsh was angry. He knew himself courageous, and the words stung him. "If you know such a place," he said, "take me there tonight, and leave me your story and a candle. Call for me when I have had time enough to read it, and I will tell you the entire plot, and then kick you out of the place." That is how it occurred that the farmer's boy, looking in at an unglazed window of the bead house, saw a man sitting in the light of a candle. The day after, late in the afternoon the next day, 3 men and a boy approached the bead house from that point of the compass towards which the boy had fled the preceding night. The men were in high spirits. They talked very loudly and laughed. They made facetious and good-humored, ironical remarks to the boy about his adventure, which evidently they did not believe in. The boy accepted their raillery with seriousness, making no reply. He had a sense of the fitness of things, and he knew that one who professes to have seen a dead man rise from his seat and blow out a candle is not a credible witness. Arriving at the house and finding the door unlocked, the party of investigators entered without ceremony. Leading out of the passage into which this door opened was another on the right and one on the left, and they entered the room on the left, the one which had the blank front window. Here was the dead body of a man. It lay partly on one side, with the forearm beneath it, the cheek on the floor. The eyes were wide open. The stare was not an agreeable thing to encounter. The lower jaw had fallen. A little pool of saliva had collected beneath the mouth. An overthrown table, a partly burned candle, a chair, and some paper with writing on it were all else that the room contained. The men looked at the body, touching the face in turn. The boy gravely stood at the head, assuming a look of ownership. It was the proudest moment of his life. One of the men said to him, "You're a good 'un," a remark which was received by the 2 others with nods of acquiescence. It was skepticism apologizing to truth. And then one of the men took from the floor the sheet of manuscript and stepped to the window, for already the evening shadows were glooming the forest. The song of the whippoorwill was heard in the distance, and a monstrous beetle sped by the window on roaring wings and thundered away out of hearing. This is what the man read in the manuscript. "Before committing the act which, rightly or wrongly, I have resolved on, and appearing before my Maker for judgment, I, James R. Colston, deem it my duty as a journalist to make a statement to the public. My name is, I believe, tolerably well known to the people as a writer of tragic tales, but the somberest imagination never conceived anything so tragic as my own life and history. Not in incident. My life has been destitute of adventure and action, but my mental career has been lurid with experiences such as kill and damn. I shall not recount them here. Some of them are written and ready for publication elsewhere, but the object of these lines is to explain to whosoever may be interested that my death is voluntary, my own act. I shall die at 12 o'clock on the night of the 15th of July, a significant anniversary to me, for it was on that day, at that hour, that my friend in time and eternity, Charles Breed, performed his vow to me by the same act which his fidelity to our pledge now entails upon me. He took his life in his little house in the Copton Woods. There was the customary verdict of temporary insanity. Had I testified at that inquest, had I told all I knew, they would have called me mad. Here followed an evidently long passage, which the man reading read to himself only. The rest, once again, he read out loud. I have still a week of life in which to arrange my worldly affairs and prepare for the great change. It is enough, for I have but few affairs, and it is now 4 years since death became an imperative obligation. I shall bear this writing on my body. The finder will please hand it to the coroner. Signed, James R. Colston. Postscript. Willard Marsh. On this, the fatal 15th of July, I hand you this manuscript, to be opened and read under the conditions agreed upon, and at the place which I designated. I forego my intention to keep it on my body to explain the manner of my death, which is not important. It will serve to explain the manner of yours. I am to call for you during the night, to receive assurance that you have read the manuscript. You know me well enough to expect me. But, my friend, it will be after 12 o'clock. May God have mercy on our souls. James R. Colston. Before the man who was reading this manuscript had finished, the candle had been picked up and lighted. When the reader had done, he quietly thrust the paper against the flame, and despite the protestations of the others, held it until it was burnt to ashes. The man who did this, and who afterward placidly endured a severe reprimand from the coroner, was a son-in-law of the late Charles Breed. At the inquest, nothing could elicit an intelligent account of what the paper had contained. The only addendum is a brief piece from The Times. Yesterday, the Commissioners of Lunacy committed to the asylum Mr. James R. Colston, a writer of some local reputation, connected with the Messenger. It will be remembered that on the evening of the 15th last, Mr. Colston was given into custody by one of his fellow lodgers on the Bain House, who had observed him acting very suspiciously, baring his throat and whetting a razor, occasionally trying its edge by actually cutting through the skin of his arm, and so on. On being handed over to the police, the unfortunate man made a desperate resistance, and has ever since been so violent that it has been necessary to keep him in a straitjacket. Most of our esteemed contemporaries, other writers, are still at large.